So we're going to begin. I might be like 30 seconds early, but I've got possibly a super short talk or a too long of a talk. It depends on where it takes me and how much of a rant I get on. But tonight's going to be a short talk followed by a long meditation. You're welcome to, you won't actually be staying live with us, but I suggest you meditate directly after the talk. It should put you in the mood. And people ask me all the time, like, Sifu, I struggle with, motivation. I don't think that I'm live on this one. Okay, let's try that again. So now I'm live, great. So people tell me all the time, Sifu, I struggle with motivation, with meditation. I sit there and my mind's wandering, or I can't even just get myself to sit for the meditation in the first place. What do? I'm a huge proponent of doing something. I forgot that I'm not wearing this right now too, by the way. If you want to scoot further away from me, you can, but I feel comfortable with you guys staying there. I'm a huge proponent of doing something that's really kind of not amps you up, but something that motivates you and excites you about meditation, whether it's listening to an incredibly motivational talk like the one that I'm about to give, or it's reading something, or prayer, or lighting incense, or listening to some kind of music that really gets you in that kind of mood. And so if you are kind of combining things, something that motivates you to meditate with your meditation, you'll notice that first of all, you're more likely to actually do the meditation, but also it tends to be a better meditation. So all that was for you guys at home, because everyone here, you have to stay and meditate. The rest of you, it's your choice, but let's go, be real, and just sit and meditate when the class is done. So the question of the week is what I want to talk about, and it's a possibly the most important question. One of my students described it once as the only important question. And it is, what is the purpose of the ego? And when I say ego, I'm not talking about the more like textbook clinical psychology definition of the ego. I'm referring to what we talk about in our meditation practice and martial arts as like the ego mind or ego identification, when we are identifying as the small self. So you can also think of it as the small self and the big self, or your highest self. Your highest self is that which is beyond the ego, and your small self is kind of like the lens through which most people, and when I say most people, I mean you and me, have a tendency to go through life. And we're kind of viewing events and experiencing things through this lens that separates us from each other. It's the part of us that compares things. It's the part of us that judges things. And I don't just mean that in a negative connotation of like it's judgmental. I mean, it is basically the thing that is conceiving of separation and differences. And the question implies that there is a purpose to this thing, and as you are still alive, you have an ego with a purpose. This is part of the purpose of the ego, is literally to keep you alive. And I should talk about this so that some of you were in class on Monday and Tuesday. You know that I was out of town, and some of you probably heard, but most of you didn't hear. I was out of town because my grandma passed away. And my grandma was 93 years old. She led an incredible long life, huge family. It was very much like a celebration of her life. I had a wonderful time seeing everybody and talking about my grandma. She was a really absolutely exceptional, wonderful woman. And I miss her and I love her. And because of part of what I'm going to be talking about tonight, I don't feel sad really about it. Some things, obviously, when I remember, it makes me sad to not have her in my life. But I'm not going to spend most of this talk talking about that specifically. But when we look at life and death, I'm not the only person who feels this way, but this is kind of my personal view, not the view that you all have to have. If you don't believe all of the things that I believe, you're still allowed to be a student of martial arts. You should still meditate. But my view is that the ego disappears when we die. And in a similar but not identical way to the way that it disappears when you become enlightened, it is permanent. Now, there are degrees of enlightenment, and I talk about this all the time. I think that there is a more permanent state that you can reach in life before death, where you really are just continuously or very consistently able to set aside the ego and experience life and your being on a deeper, more connected plane or level. But I like to think that even if we don't get there, and don't let this be an excuse to be lazy with your meditation, but I like to think that even if we don't get there in life, we're going to get there eventually. Now, many belief systems hold that if you don't get it in this life, you're reborn and you are reincarnated, and so you get another chance to do it, and you might need many chances to finally break through, become enlightened, and kind of break out of the cycle of reincarnation. If that's what you believe, great. If that leads you to be lazy with your meditation in this life because you're thinking, I'll just have another shot later on, it's not what it's designed for. But whether you believe you're coming back or not, eventually the idea is you're breaking free of the ego. And it would not be accurate, in my opinion, to say that the ego only exists so that you can get rid of it. Because then, like, why do we have it in the first place? It serves several purposes. One of them is to keep us alive so that we can, we recognize that we are separate from the cars driving by the front of the dojo. We don't leave class and just walk out into traffic. It keeps us safe. It keeps us alive. It helps us to recognize that if I just give all of my food to somebody else, that I'm going to die. And that might be a choice that you make, but it's likely going to be a choice that you make kind of outside of the ego. It's very difficult for us as a being identifying as the ego as separate to just totally freely give of all of our resources so that there's not enough to keep us alive. We die so that somebody else can stay alive. And some of you have experienced that very thing. Some of you have kids. Some of you have people that you care about enough in your life that you would say, without a question, I would give everything that I have to help this person survive. If it means that I die, so be it. There is kind of an intellectual way to get at that, and then there's more of just a deep, resonating certainty that you might have with a given person, or if you're lucky with multiple people, that that you would just be able to set aside that ego identification and just give whatever is needed to somebody else. This is one of the ways that we can kind of transform and move beyond the ego, is by giving ourselves this bigger view and allowing ourselves to become part of a greater whole in a relationship, with family, with even the community that we have in the dojo. I was discussing this with a student before class, and she brought up this idea that what if the ego exists so that we can recognize when somebody else, and I'm going to paraphrase what you said, not exactly, but kind of the idea, which I really like, is like, what if our ego exists, at least at times or in part, so that we can help other people out of their ego states? And sure, I think that the most effective that we will be at helping people out of their ego states is for us to also be out of our ego states and just be the perfect example of this. As Gandhi said, be the change that you want to see in the world. But the ego is the thing that makes us have conflict. And sometimes conflict is what can make us recognize this is futile and ridiculous. I need to let go of this ego. Or it might help somebody else recognize that. The more that life feels like this, the more you are identifying with, and then if you're doing the work, recognizing your ego. And this is what Sifu Brown, my teacher, always says, and I'm sure that he stole it from somebody else, but this is the purpose of our practice, is recognition of the ego and then destruction of the ego. And if we think of the ego as a tool, then we can use the ego and its purpose can be fulfilled, and then we can let it go, right? If you have a hammer and you pick it up and you use it, you nail in these nails, and then you set it down and walk away, that was great. The hammer couldn't be happier, and you are not attached and therefore perfectly happy moving along. That's not the kind of relationship that we tend to have with the ego. What we do is we surgically attach the hammer to our body and we carry it around, and everything is a nail to be hammered down, right? And our ego seems like so much of a part of us that we cannot even conceive of a person or of a world where we're not separate from them. And it is on some level just as ludicrous as everything being a nail that we must hammer down. So we've got to be able to set it aside. And our practice is here to help us set it aside at first just for a moment. In meditation, you might just get a moment where you're free of the ego and you're just feeling the breath and you're experiencing what is beyond or behind the darkness of closed eyes. And in that moment, it's great. There's a fullness to it. There's a connectedness to it that is really perfect, or as close to perfect as we can get. But I really like the analogy of our time in this plane of existence as being like a play. And when you are on stage in this play, you have a specific way of being. You have this role that you're playing, and you might be playing the role of a doctor, you might be playing the role of an artist, you might be playing the role of a Sifu, whatever it is. You might look at this role and say, I hate this script, I don't want to be playing this role. And maybe, and this is a whole other talk, you can demand that I'm going to play a different role, but for our purposes tonight, you have the role that you're given. This is the life that we have. And when we are identifying as the ego, you have this role and you're separate from all the other players on the stage. And what you're making is this beautiful entertainment. And when we are identifying as the ego and playing these roles, you'll notice that life is incredibly dramatic, so exciting and interesting and entertaining, at least for other people. And this has been described as like part of our purpose here is to be entertainment for whoever's watching, the universe, the divine, God, whoever you think is watching this. And you don't really need to try extra hard to be entertaining. You're already doing just fine. All of the crazy stuff that happens in life, even if you think that your life is not that crazy, it's plenty entertaining. And that is part of the purpose of this, is to just be interesting and be entertaining. And if we are able to let go of the habit of ego identification, if we're able to move beyond that with meditation, through our practice, through enlightenment, even if it's just in kind of fits and spurts, we are able to then kind of separate ourselves from this role that we're playing. Because remember, what we're doing when we do that is actually becoming part of the whole. So if we're able to do that, what are we actually doing? We're like becoming one with the universe, one with God, one with everything that is watching this entertainment and being incredibly entertained by it. And so then when you go like this, you can have a sense that you are watching yourself go through life, and it's just like it's a comedy. It's a drama, it's a comedy, it's a whatever, it's a dramedy. And it's super entertaining. And when you can look at it and recognize, oh, this is my ego, it's having a real hard time right now. Let's pop some popcorn and just enjoy this. That will give you a momentary solace, or perhaps a more lasting kind of peace, where you realize that my ego wants to take things personally. My ego wants to stay separate from everything else, and that's my ego's job, so I'm going to let it do it. The ego's got an ego, and I'm just here to watch and enjoy it. And the ego's going to take you on this ride and just enjoy every up and every down. This is a very helpful way of looking at the ego. And you can't blame the ego for being the ego. It is what it is. It's doing exactly what it's designed to do. So why be angry at it? We don't want to fight against it. If meditation feels like you're fighting against the ego and trying to stuff it away, and like you're admonishing yourself for having emotions and drama and whatever, that's not going to have the kind of effect that you really want it to have. So just watch it and enjoy. And you might get this sense when you're meditating that you can actually start to recognize the thoughts that you're having and separate yourself from them in a way so that you're just observing them. And you recognize that, wait a minute, my thoughts are not me, and the ego is not me. I am whatever is bigger than that, observing and watching. And if you're able to do this in meditation, you might, with greater success, and it's going to happen more often outside of meditation. You can be able to do the same thing, right? You recognize yourself really getting riled up about something. You're taking something super personally. You're making it all about you. And then you're able to go like, wait a minute, I know what's going on here. This is entertainment. I'm going to back up, look at it, let this run its course, and be totally okay with whatever is going on, right? So there could be many purposes for the ego. I think that one of the most helpful things to think of the ego as being is entertainment, and not something to fight against, but something to just enjoy. And when we do that, it won't have the same kind of grip on us. If you're watching a movie and you get sucked into the movie, it's a really good movie, right? But then at some point, somebody gets up to go to the bathroom and you're like, oh, whoa, this is a movie. This is not actually happening. And, when you're meditating or you're having an experience like that in life, you're able to kind of get yourself out of it and recognize this is something as entertaining as it is, and as much as it pulls me in, this is not necessarily me. This is not the entirety of who I am. So part of what the ego is there for is also to give us something to kind of move beyond. It's a fun challenge for us in life. If we didn't have drama, if we didn't have the excitement of the ego, life would be pretty bland. Existence would just be consciousness, and it's just like, what am I doing? I'm just floating through nothingness, and where's the spice here? So the spice of life is all this crazy stuff that the ego throws at us. So enjoy it, and don't be so pulled into it that it feels like the entirety of you. That's like all you are is the hammer, and all you can do is nail down nails. You want to be able to set it aside and really appreciate in the moment. There is no taking it personally. In the moment, there is nothing but just the breath and the perfection of us connecting to something bigger. In meditation, this is what we're trying to do tonight. And you'll have it for a moment and you'll lose it, and that's okay. Just let go of whatever thought arises, let go of whatever attachments your ego feels that it needs to have, and then just find the moment again. Find the breath again, find your deepest, highest self. Sit comfortably.